was intended to be a conversation that was held once in 1997 when President Clinton's Commission on Race came to town. Clara Villarosa, who owned the Human Experience bookstore, brought some people to the meeting. Joyce Mescus, who owned the Tattered Cover bookstore, brought some people to the meeting. And this was intended to happen one time. And almost 17 years later, we are still getting together.
I identify myself, depending on what part of my life I want to talk about, but early part of my life, I really identified myself as white. And as I began to explore who I am and why things were happening, then I began to look at my own heritage, which is third generation Japanese American.
I started my career as a socially active special ed teacher. I was interested in emotional behavioral disorders, which made me become a social worker, which I've been doing a little over 30 years now. I consider myself an activist. And as an identity, I've begun to call myself a bicultural African American because I grew up internationally, and the Latino communities have been a very huge influence in my upbringing.
Hi, I'm Terry Richardson, and I'm a physician at Kaiser Permanente during my day job, and I'm a supreme volunteer the other hours that are left in the day. And I identify myself as a proud Black woman.
Particularly our European American friends here, of having conversations with family members or classmates or in what you may consider to be a safe white environment that says, you know, those people of color or those Black people, those Mexicans or whatever, and then they will draw back from that when they're in the presence of somebody, of a person of color, and they won't express those kind of things. Does anybody have the experience of family or anything like that happen to you?
And recently I was having, not recently, a couple of times, I was having this conversation and saying to one of my oldest friends, would you talk like this if a Black person were part of this conversation? And he sat back and said yes, and I said, well, a whole bunch of Black people are part of this conversation right now. We're on Facebook, and I got a lot of Black people that are listening. In both situations, I didn't hear back anything. These are lifelong friends. These are people I've known my entire life.
When we talk about that level of privilege, and when I was listening to people describe themselves in this group, you can talk about how you're a part of the human race. Somebody said I'm part of the human race. I'm ethnic European, but nobody once said I'm proud to be a white person. Terry and I both said we're proud Black women, and it was like, wow, you no longer have that privilege to say I'm a proud white person, because now it's just so, politically incorrect.
If you do raise this issue of race, then you're just creating more of a problem. You're separating us more, etc. So we've created this atmosphere that it's not something to be discussed. The other thing, this notion of blindness, color blindness, not only does it minimize the importance of the discussion, but it also frames our capacity to how we deal with this topic of race. Because there are people in the millennial generation, regardless of their racial and ethnic identification, that struggle with a conversation about race. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people of color who believe that race is no longer an issue or a problem within our society. So it's not just one racial or ethnic group, it's a broad spectrum of people. And then my final comment is, we all talk about race being socially constructed, and that's true. But I think for me, we need to drill down a little bit deeper and understand the ideological construction of race. If we look at race as something that really exists within a framework, it's never existed outside of a framework of group interests, let's say. And it was a group interest where one group, white, was prioritized over non-whites. And that's the ideological framework of it. So yes, it's a social construction, but ideologically it sits there and it infuses all of our social systems, whether it's education, healthcare, criminal justice, or anything.
I've been a community activist for many years. I've had survival jobs along the way, and I'm probably the only living Japanese American who doesn't have a college degree. So I'm a Sansei, third generation Japanese. I view it as a very dangerous time in our history because we are having all of those things drawn back from us, the resegregation of schools. And it's all done under the guise of, this is what's best for the children, when we know that the actual effects are not true. And so we're fed these lies to try and convince us that we don't need to struggle anymore. We can just sit back and relax and everything will be fine.
I am a white educator in front of primarily minority students. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's almost as though, like, I always question myself, is it enough to make myself vulnerable in front of my students and talking about these issues and bringing light to a lot of things that are unspoken? Is there something more I can be doing? And if so, what is that? What does that look like as a white ally, as a white activist? And two, I always find myself challenging sort of that model minority norm that's so pervasive in charter school culture in Denver, where you come in, you sit down silently, you fold your hands, you talk in a specific way, mm-hmm. you act, you write in a specific way, yeah. and I try really hard, in my own pedagogy, not to perpetuate those model minority stereotypes, mm-hmm. and find a lot of challenge when I push back against those charter ideals of compliance, of interested and hardworking individuals that are not shouting out, that are not out of their chairs, that essentially are not being themselves, and that are not necessarily bringing their cultures into the classroom.
I had a mentor who was an old white guy from Tennessee, right? Wonderful man. And when I had finished my doctorate and I was organizing myself to kind of go out into the professional world and get taken on by somebody as this green psychologist, he looked at all my stuff and he says, if I didn't know you when I read this stuff, I wouldn't know you were black. And I looked at Harl and I said, you may know Harl Young, and I said, pardon me? He said, I read through this stuff and I couldn't tell from what I read here that you were black. Does that matter? Well, why are you hiding that? And I thought, ooh, he's right, I am hiding it.
So I'm going back to a comment you made, in particular, a long time ago in this conversation, about how white people don't say that they're proud to be a white person. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is a dynamic that's true in our society around racism, that white people don't believe that they can put aside their whiteness and be a great teacher or be a great whatever. That the message we've gotten over and over again is, be suspicious that your whiteness will come through in any situation, and be humble.
Yeah. I've often struggled with that whole, does my action perpetuate some of these issues because my ideology and the institutions that I'm operating in are, built structurally oppressive. And I think that the only way that I'm able to do that is by first making sure that my blind spots are continuously addressed and that I never stay in the same place of feeling, of not knowing what I don't know. And so, these types of dialogues I think are absolutely essential to that piece, because then once I realize my own blind spot is, if there's a little light that's shed in a specific area, then I can tie that not only into how I interact with the community and individuals and in my daily life, but I can also take a peek at the structures of my job and the structures of my city and my government and make sure that
as a citizen of the world, I'm making responsible decisions based off that little teeny piece of light that was shed on that blind spot that wouldn't have been shed had I not had a conversation with people with multiple perspectives.
So what kind of advice do you have, based on your own experience, about how do we get to 2045, in a way that we really take advantage of who we all are and what we bring to the table?